Marisa, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can.
Hi, hello, Marisa. My name is Aslan. I'm very glad to see you. I'm very happy to hear you. Tell us, Marisa, where are you at the moment, and what time is it? What time of the day is it? Where are you at?
I am 2 hours north of New York City.
Oh,
I'm near a forest,
near a forest.
and it is
Nice.
beautiful here. Yeah.
Well, I can only envy the view you have outside of your window, and especially at this time of year when the fall, the nature is turning yellow and orange, and I think it's a good afternoon for you. So good afternoon. Uh, I hope I hope your day is going good. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for taking your time to speak to our audience, to share about your experience and about your work. I just one last reminder to our audience, to our viewers. Uh, if you have any questions that you want to ask Marisa during her presentations, you can always write them down in the chat right below the live stream. And in the end of Marisa's session, there's going to be a Q&A session. That's the time when I'm going to ask the most interesting and pressing questions on your behalf. So Marisa, the floor is yours. Not going to take any time from your presentation. You can start.
Great. And it's actually the morning where
Oh,
I am.
yeah.
So
So
my
good morning.
son is just waking up, so you may see him in pajamas coming into the room.
Wonderful, wonderful. So good morning then to you. Yeah.
Thank you. So you can see my screen, yeah?
Yes, yes, we definitely
Okay.
can.
So Aslan, the things that I wanted to, I know that the Go Viral audience here and the other presenters are talking about different aspects of civic life, entrepreneurship, and creativity. And the thing that I wanted to emphasize in our conversation was the importance of joy and humor and creativity in creating a social fabric. And that social fabric also becomes a really important place where we then begin to become sensitized and see and understand what are some of the larger problems that we may not have otherwise have seen. And so this is what art does. It brings us a safe place where we can experiment, both ourselves and other participants. And also as a viewer, we're able to transport ourselves and see things in a different way. So it really, arts go hand in hand with entrepreneurship and businesses thriving. So as an introduction to my work, I create frame tales, like Arabian Nights or 1001 Nights, which is a frame tale with different stories tucked in between. And it's a very collaborative story that was created over many millennia and many continents and by women. It's if you in many of the translations, there's you see the power of women, which is interesting and very subtle. And I work across many different media. So I do drawings, I do a lot of photographs and video. And this is a series of works that explores how we see ourselves reflected in and distorted in the other. So I started it in New York on the right. Um, I then was collaborating with artists and filmmakers in Uganda, and what we do is we create these stories. These in English you would say a vignette or a tableau, a little micro story, and through that story, what come out are the local myths and also what's happening in society. So Uganda is a country that's in transition, and there's many things that cannot be said in the free press and the journal and in journalism. And so there's the arts play a really important role for giving people a voice. And I also was doing these photographs and these vignettes with people in Central Asia. So this is in Uzbekistan, um, in Azerbaijan, Here, the quote is from Victor Turner, who's an anthropologist. So he says, "We are most free to explore identity in places outside of our normal routines, places that are in some way betwixt and between." So this photograph felt like someone accepting what the future to come. Oh, actually, this is in Kazakhstan. This one felt like this person was making a sacrifice. And so there's two projects that I'm going to focus on. And both, one takes place in Honduras in Central America and has traveled to other countries in Central and North America. And the other project takes place in the United States, and both are with communities that have been historically under-recognized. And they really take place in the absence of either the private sector or the public sector. They take place by citizens coming together. And it's by citizens, I should even say it's sometimes people without formal paperwork, right? So the undocumented communities here that are maybe not counted in the official statistics of a country. And so some people who might be considered and seen as powerful, but here we are harnessing the imagination to create something that's really urgent. So I start with this project that I created with a community in well, what happened was in this rural area of a few hundred people, they invited me to come do a bookmaking and literacy workshop, which is what I was teaching in after-school programs. And the reason why they invited me was they said, "We have the largest library in northern Honduras, and we know that you do these workshops around literacy and bookmaking through the arts. And this is something that we need." They had already identified themselves through a survey. They said that literacy was the number one reason that they were going to pull themselves up from their poverty cycle. So, and I usually work with communities that have self-identified an urgent social need. And when I got to the small community and they showed me their library, it was one bookshelf long because they had, which is to say that in this region, there are so few resources. So this is the project that we created to make our workshops stick. Can you hear the audio? Okay, so this project, really, when I say it spread to other communities, it was a small group of kids in school and teenagers and their mothers who then took the workshop to the different 19 surrounding communities. And then I was invited to museums. And I should say that in this community, this workshop first started taking place 10 years ago, and they still continue doing it today. And for this community, the reason why it's so sticky is because there's an urgency about storytelling, which is that it's a way to overcome, through storytelling, you can overcome, it's like life, you overcome the challenges of life through storytelling. And then I was invited to do this project in other museums and public libraries in North America. So it has also been translated into a museum exhibition that has traveled to a few museums here in the United States. And in this, you see here on the right, there's the video of Biblu Bandido, which means story eater. You see the video on the right, and then you're invited to go into this shadowy place, which feels like you're inside the belly of this character who loves to eat books. This idea of this figure that we all love to eat and consume stories is, we are all like this. We all are hungry for other people's stories. Just this character takes it a little bit further. And in this space, you're invited to sit down at the tables and you make a little book, and then you go to the far corner where the little white box is over there, and you kneel down and you whisper your story to inside this hole in the wall. And you see this kind of flashing lights, and it feels like you're inside this character's stomach. And so, this idea of sacrifice that brings us together, and the transformation from oneself to an understanding of a broader understanding about humanity comes through storytelling. And I think it's a segue or transition to the next project that I'll share with you. In the United States, most of workers received their basic rights, like minimum wage and meal breaks, in the 1930s and 40s. And this was considered a really progressive moment for everyday people. But domestic workers, which is nannies, housekeepers, and caregivers for the elderly or disabled, along with farm workers, were excluded at that time from racist lawmakers in the southern part of the United States. The reason was because domestic workers and farm workers were largely African American and Black. And Southern lawmakers, the people in charge, feared that if they gained political rights, economic rights, that would translate into a political voice and they would lose power. So most of the laws in the United States stayed the same way until recently. So for over 75 years. And then about 10 years ago, there's a woman named Ai-jen Poo, who's a collaborator, and she started organizing domestic workers in New York to share their story with lawmakers in the Capitol in New York. And through sharing their stories, they passed the nation's first set of laws in New York State. And after that, these laws have expanded state by state. So now we have 7 states that have basic laws, the same as other workers, protecting them. To get the word out to the 200,000 domestic workers in the United States, they approached me to think about ways that we could get this word out. So I started doing these series of workshops with domestic workers. This is with a group of Brazilian domestic workers in Massachusetts, the second state we went to. And we do these really fun workshops. And the goal of them is not to re-traumatize and exploit the challenges, but to really come up with solutions drawing from their experience. And so we created these audio novellas, these kind of short audio stories that we created the system with engineers at MIT, And this was before smartphones were available. So the way this works was that you call 347 work 500. So you call on any kind of phone, and you use your phone to navigate. Because at this time, smartphones were too expensive for domestic workers. And so after this series of audio novellas that we did in New York, this is when, right when we made them public, other states started passing their Bill of Rights. And to be able to meet the needs of domestic workers in other states, I created what we called the nanny van. So I went with my son, who was then 1 year old, and with our nanny and a filmmaker, and we would meet with we would kind of pop up into public spaces, and we would bring people together to share stories and resources and information. Because the thing about domestic work is that it's not something that the laws and the government in the United States really covers. This is something that is excluded, and so they don't cover it. So this is something, an urgent need that we need to have filled. And I think for parents and people who are caring for someone who's in a wheelchair, or those of us who are caring for our grandparents, we all know that if there's not caregiving, then the rest of society breaks down. And the United States is unfortunately a place where we tend to live apart from our grandparents, and we put them away in homes that are far away from us, that we cannot see. And it's a kind of a very sad crisis. And it's also a culture where we don't provide for childcare. So, and I should say that after I had my son, my husband has an injury, and so he couldn't lift our baby up to even kind of comfort him to sleep. So I really relied on a nanny to help me go back to work, or even just to balance things. So the nanny van, I'll share you a clip. I was continuing to record people singing. I would make a lot of policy toolkits. I was just observing and immersed in this world of how people are organizing. And the thing with the nanny van is that it's I think of it like a sculpture that brings and beckons people to come see it. And, I think we heard so many times, people saying things like, I've worked as a nanny for over 15 years, and I never proudly identified as a domestic worker or someone who had basic rights until I saw the nanny van. And so some of the things that we produced along the way is I produced an album of domestic workers singing, and it's something that we would dance to. Here's a short clip.
I went to my friend Guillermina, who taught me about the power of music to uplift others and energize a movement. Guillermina started cleaning homes when she was 6 years old. Later in life, she crossed the border from Mexico with her kids, left an abusive situation, and is today one of the leading advocates of a national movement for domestic workers' rights. For Guillermina, music helped her get through tough times. She also uses music as an organizing tool.
Yes, we can! Yes, we can! Domestic workers, sí se ve. A ver, todos. Yes, we can! Yes, we can! Domestic workers, sí se ve. En los momentos que estaba pasando violencia doméstica o en los momentos que estaba sola con mis hijos, una canción me ha ayudado mucho a salir adelante, pero una canción de justicia social. Porque las canciones de románticos o de borrachera sí son buenas, pero en ese momento donde una mujer latina, inmigrante, necesita apoyo
Estas canciones son las más adecuadas para levantar el autoestima y para lograr cambios en la vida de una mujer. Se ha formado una alianza nacional que tiene la esperanza de ganar. Vamos, vamos, compañeras, no debemos de parar nuestra...
And here I'm going to play you a clip of what that looks like.
Choreograph a dance whose gestures, like shaking the sheets, make care work visible. Other gestures narrate the history of domestic work or point out strategies to move us forward.
So, with that clip, there's a couple of things I want to point out. For one, Guillermina is someone who, she's a really amazing community organizer because she is, she has gone through so much, and she uses her voice and and her sense of humor and her love of joy to bring people together, which I think with this question of dignifying care also comes with comes through the arts. And the other thing is with the dance. The reason why I started choreographing these dances was because we would be at, for example, a political rally, or we would be, after a courthouse when we were trying to change the law. And sometimes it feels so heavy that I thought to myself, well, gosh, I feel like this was such an important moment, but it feels so heavy. And we just, it felt like the only thing that we could do to change it would be to move our bodies and also to hear us. So that's why I started doing these dances. And also they narrate the history of this movement, which is not a new movement. We started changing laws in the United States 10 years ago, but the history of domestic workers organizing has always been there, but invisible, see? I was also creating a series of these posters that were primarily going into, and digital works, they were going into museums, and they were speaking specifically to the people who go into museums, which are not domestic workers. They're the people who hire domestic workers. So we say domestic employers. And then in 2018, we produced this film, which came out on PBS, and I'll share you a sample.
My name's Marisa John, and this 1967 Mercury station wagon is the Care Force One, inspired by some of the incredible caregivers I've met. So Anjum, Choco, and I are going on an adventure from New York City to Miami.
There is one problem.
We left the lights on.
We don't know nothing about cars.
Care in America is undervalued.
People don't see us with a brain. They see us as just people who clean or wipe old people's spot. But we are more than that. How was your day?
They're often facing a larger degree of vulnerability because their immigration status is tied to their employer.
At the turn of the last century, 90% of African American women were in domestic work.
So there's a whole lot of changes that have to be done.
I hope you'll join us as we navigate car issues and care issues and find solutions to both from the amazing people we meet along the way.
So, then this what I thought was so the film came out in 2018, and I did a series of kind of tours talking about it, and showing the film, and it's available online. And then I had a bit of a pause, and before I share with you the next chunk of work that is the kind of new extension of the Care Force, of this body of work, I'm going to share with you a personal kind of story. For the past 25 years, I've been photographing shadows. And I was, when I was photographing them, 20 years ago, I had it in my mind, this quote by the writer Dostoevsky. And when he was about to be hanged, he was looking out into the trees, and he said, but I see, in his autobiography, he writes that the shadows of the trees seem so beautiful. And he comes to the conclusion that it could not be so beautiful if it were not God. And this is the moment when he becomes Christian. And he also then becomes pardoned, and he's allowed to live. He's no longer hanged. And there's something about this quote that made me have some kind of sense about why I was photographing these shadows. For me, it felt like I'm not Christian, but there's something to me that was so precious about this thing that was kind of inexplicable, these beautiful shadows. And why I was photographing them. I also am someone who, I have very low vision. So right now, it's correctable. But I started needing very heavy prescription of contact lenses and glasses since I was in 5th grade. And it's gotten worse. And thankfully, I'm still at the point where it can be corrected. But so in a sense, the photographs to me represent this place of being halfway towards blindness. And so this has been with me as I share with you. I should also say my grandmother on my Chinese side, she is someone who experienced low vision late in life. And this is something that in the United States, the number of people with low vision or blindness doubles by the year 2050. So this is an opportunity to, this question I have is this is not an insignificant number of people in the United States. This is, estimated between 6 and 10 million people, but we don't build for this in our culture. It's something that we don't talk about. So in this newest extension of the Care Force, I have been working with a team of an architect, Rafi Siegel, who he is someone who builds for cooperative living. He's built in these international places where multi-generational living in Israel and the Philippines and the United States. And Ernst Valerie, who's an immigrant from Haiti, as well as our CFO, Ellen Itzkovitz, who comes from the intersection of healthcare and finance. And so the question the project that we're thinking about is how can caregivers live with older people, and so that the problems that we have right now in the United States, where there's not enough caregivers to meet the needs of people right now, and that will increase and double by the year 2050, as well as how can we provide good wages to caregivers when their labor is so needed, because there's just physically not enough people to go around. So we need to cluster people together to provide clustered care. So for older people in the United States, they become more vulnerable. They become more economically vulnerable as they age. So when changes in cities take place, we would say gentrification, and the cost of rent and housing goes up, then older people are among the first to get displaced. Then caregivers in the United States, 60% skip meals in order to be able to feed their own families. And for both groups, older people and caregivers, the isolation is a key challenge that impacts their health and their well-being. So we asked this question of how can we improve some of the other conditions of how people are living together to make it better for both older people and caregivers. And so in Care House, which is the project that we're creating, caregivers would live in Care House, 4 caregivers, and 12 older people. The first site is this abandoned building in Baltimore, in Maryland, which is a historically under-resourced community. And we've been doing a series of co-design sessions where we bring together planners, nurses, caregivers, there's Guillermina up there, people who are disabled, and locals from the neighborhoods to give input into our project. And so this is an early sketch of what Care House would look like. So this is from the back view. There's a lot of terraces and windows so that in a pandemic, people have places to eat and socialize. There's also a lot of windows looking onto the street, which is important to help maintain safety. And the amount of shared space is more than what normally takes place in senior homes or in most of our homes today in the United States. So in the ground floor, just to kind of walk through what this looks like, there's a retail space, and you see the garden on the left-hand side is one of the places where there's a lot of greenery. The roof is also entirely a green roof because it encourages older people to go outside, be in daylight, and also gives them the opportunity to socialize with their family or friends, because sometimes as people get older, they become more difficult they lose their cognitive ability to socialize. And so doing things like gardening allows people to be side by side and working together. There's a shared kitchen, which is important for maintaining nutritious meals. And this question of low vision comes into the project because we're designing for people who have low vision. So it turns out if you provide high contrast, for example, here on the outside of the sink, you see it's in red, so you can easily see. And then this is something that strangely I started doing because when I take out my contact lenses or my glasses, I can't see anything. And so I had already started, for the past like 20 years, like, my wallet, my phone, the place, like all my important items are in red too. It's something I started doing without knowing that this is something how you design for older people with vision, or anyone with vision loss. So this is a mood board. This is not of Care House, but it's samples that we are using to kind of understand what the look and feel might be. So there's samples of the garden. There's the terrace on the outside where people can eat. And it's, this is an architectural project, but it's also an economic project. So we want to be providing good jobs for the 4 caregivers, and also for the meals, which are a really important moment to bring people together. How can we provide job training to people in the neighborhood who need more opportunities to make a living and to have a job? How can we train them to help prepare these healthy meals? And then these local residents have skills that they can take to other to lead their own enterprises and their own businesses. And we're also making a film about the project because we understand that yes, it's an architectural project, it's an economic project, but it's also a way that we can influence policies, how mayors and cities shape, and urban planners shape the civic design, how we can shape things on a broader nationwide level, and influence how we value care and how we value people with disabilities. And so with that, I give you my email should you have questions and want to reach out.
Thank you very much, Marisa. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you very much for such an interesting presentation. That's, an enormous amount of work that you showed to us that's extremely interesting to me, and I'm sure extremely interesting to all of our viewers. We have several questions, but first, I have a question of my own. So, while working on this project, Care Force, right? Did you face any backlash from anyone, any group of people? I mean, some negative reactions, or maybe some misunderstood messages, or something like that. If you did, then who they were, like who were these people, and why do you think they might get it in the wrong way, or maybe might misunderstand it?
I think we actually did not receive ourselves negative criticism, because we're starting from the place of not, well, in the United States, I think one of the reasons is that care is something that goes across political parties and political divisions. Everybody has somebody in their lives who they have taken care of, or they have been, they had someone important in their lives, a nanny, a caregiver who cared for their family. So everybody has a relationship to care, which is interesting. So if we're starting from the place of not having definitive answers and not knowing. It's always a learning process for us. And we more often encountered things like people saying things like, I never thought about care until I saw the Care Force one. Or, my whole life, there's someone who was a curator who said to us, my whole life I've relied on caregivers. His daughter is somebody who she's disabled. She needs caregivers in her life. His parents had people who cared for them. And it's so invisible that until you need it, and until it's pointed out to you, then you don't always see it. So it's more like these stories of people saying, oh my gosh, I've never really thought about care and the lives of these women. And I don't judge. We don't judge, because I think we're all in that. I didn't think about it quite so intensely until I needed care. And I first started blaming myself. I said, well, what terrible choices did I make that care is so expensive? And how am I in this situation? And then it's only when I started researching it that I started realizing that I wasn't alone, that there's tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people in the United States who have the same struggle, but it's not something that we as a society have addressed. So under the current presidential administration, there is, perhaps there's more, not directed towards our project, but I think that there's a lot of new fear under the current presidential administration, because it is not welcoming to immigrants. So that is something that really has changed our work since we started it, because we were making a lot of progress with the laws and changing laws state by state and cities to give domestic workers basic rights. We're just talking about a meal break every 6 hours, or a day of rest. And now it's fighting against racism, which is unfortunate.
Well, thank you. And I have a follow-up question, which is a little bit connected to the first question. You're raising awareness about these people and the work they do and the situations they are in all the time. So did you meet anyone from people from the group of domestic workers that think that you're raising too much awareness, or maybe you're raising attention to? Was there anyone who didn't want this much attention on them or their problems, or all of them, were with you on the same page?
I think they're all with me and us on the same page, because I think domestic workers in the United States, the United States is like 50 different countries smashed into one country. It's so different. And the number, it's, caregiving in New York, it's Nepali women, Tibetan women, women from the Philippines, Central American women. And it's really different, for example, in Chicago, where it's Polish, there's a lot of Polish and Latina women and Black women too. So it's more like everyone is interested in what everyone else has to say, because it's so different, and because it's an invisible workforce, and because there is so much work that we're all discovering and sharing. Everybody's interested to know what others are saying. So I think all of the domestic employers and domestic workers want the visibility. I think there is this question with domestic employers where sometimes there's a feeling of guilt. So it's less a question of visibility and more of this question when someone starts becoming aware and they're a domestic employer and they say, oh, shoot, have I been doing this correctly? And really the case is because there's no guidebook, there's no laws, there's no information. It seems so crazy that when you have a child, and you're in the hospital and you just go home with this child, you have to have a driver's license before you can drive a car. But you just take your child home and there's no information about how you're supposed to care for your child, or how you employ a nanny and what you should do. So I think it's this question of, again, not knowingness and people feeling, oh, shoot, have I been doing this correctly? And then realizing like, oh, actually, I just don't. So, I mean, the information we're trying to provide is you're not alone. No one has this information because it's not provided by the government it's not something that we know. And so we don't pass judgment. It's we want to make it a very welcoming place. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for answering that question in so many details. That was really helpful. Here we have a question from one of our viewers. She's asking, what should happen so you would say, that's it, my work here is done? Or is there any, is there a way, is there a possibility that this project will be finished at some time? Or is it, it's going to be on a continuous basis, it's not going to stop? What do you think about that?
I think that's interesting. I thought that, after working on the project from 2011 and the film came out in 2018 and we were still kind of showing it, I thought, okay, I'm probably done for now. I'm at a good place. But then this question of housing, it kept on returning to me because I kept on hearing, remembering so many of the women were telling me about how I'm thinking about this woman who's Nepali, Narbada Chetri, and she's in New York City. And she said, my dream, she came from Nepal, and her dream was to live with her sisters, the other women who also, not her biological sisters, but the other women from Nepal who were also here and not stuck here, but they're in a kind of a weird visa issue with the United States. The United States gave them the visa, and then it's like, okay, no, go home. But they've made a life here. They've had kids there. They can't just leave here now, and they provide the income for their families back in Nepal. So her dream was to have a house and a home that she would share with her sisters. And this was something that was over and over told to me. And so this question of the housing care house returned to me. And then I met my colleague, Rafi Seagal, who's an architect who has been building co-living spaces. And so we just kept on the conversation going. And there's kind of a tremendous energy around this question that is really fascinating to see. And so we're carrying it forward. I think the movement itself, I think we have victories along the way. I think we have victories when all 50 states in the United States have laws recognizing the importance of caregivers And I think we have victory when we have mothers and parents who have more support, because this is an area that is not supported in the United States. And I think we have a victory when we recognize the importance of undocumented immigrants in the United States.
Well, let's hope that's what's going to happen in a shorter as possible time, right? So here's the next question. The person says, and she's asking if it's okay to ask a personal question from you, Marisa. She says, do you think about yourself in the future, about your own, about the time you're going to be older, and are you afraid of that time? How do you think, what do you think you're going to do at that point of time? You know, what do you think how do you think the situation is going to be at that point? Or do you think about that? Do you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really do, because I mean, I just, really, it's like with older adults in the United States, there's not enough choices that people have. There's not enough everybody wants to live at home, but there's not enough caregivers to make that happen. There's physically not enough. And then, the economics of aging, what we call aging in place, doesn't work out for 99% of Americans. And I don't want to be one of those people who then goes to what's called a senior home, and it costs $70,000 US per year. And it's like terrible, gross, disgusting food. It's like living in, it's very isolating. It's like you're living far from your friends and family. It's like you just go there to kind of be dumped and you die. And that seems to me horrible. So, I mean, I think for me, the care house is this question of like, well, how do I want to die? Like, where do I want to live when I get really old? It's like, I want to live, and the fear of blindness it's a very real fear. It's my number one fear. I don't have a fear of public speaking. I have a fear of going blind. And because I'm a visual artist also. So I think what makes me feel like I'm doing something, I mean, where I would want to live in a care house. It's like, I want to live with friends and people who I think are interesting. I want to live in a place that's beautiful and has awesome, sexy architecture. And I want to live in a place where there's a garden, and I want to live in a place with really good food, and where there's art. So I feel like I'm designing for what I want in the future, and what, millions and hundreds of millions of people also want. But that doesn't take place in the United States.
That sounds like those places sound like a place everyone would think of going to when they become older, if we were lucky enough in our lifetime. So here's another question, and it's also the person is asking if that's polite to ask this kind of question, and it's about the finances of your project. Where do you get the finances for the project? Is it fundraising, or from public fundraising, or is it individual investors who are interested in this in your work and this kind of projects?
Yeah, and do you think that? Well, so I can talk about the economics of, so like the Biblu Bandido project that took place. So I first went there when I was in my late 20s, and I didn't have money. The people who invited me to go, this woman, she had a bake, and Honduras is like the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. The average in US dollars, they make on average $700 per year. So they didn't have money. But this woman who is a teacher, she's a school teacher in San Francisco named Rachel McIntyre. She had a bake sale with her students, and they sold cupcakes, and they raised money for me it was about $500 for me to buy a plane ticket there, and to me to be able to purchase a year's worth of art supplies to do this workshop. And so that's how Biblu Bandido took place. When I'm doing it in the United States, it's museums or libraries who offer myself and my team a stipend. For the Care Force project, most of that was a small amount was crowdfunded. Most of it came from foundations, so philanthropic foundations who, so it was either art or film, like Tribeca Film Festival, for example, Film Institute, Sundance, social justice funders supported. And so the Care House is a different question because that's a mixture of private and public sources, what we assume. We're just starting to get going on it. So for most real estate developers, they expect a return of at least 15% of what they initially invest. And, our team is unique because we're not doing this project to profit. We want it to be a robust business. Part of it is a for-profit, but not intended to make it functions like a nonprofit, but it's set up like a for-profit. And then another part of it is like a cooperative or a nonprofit, and that's the to support the caregivers and the cooks and the job training and things like this. So we do want to attract social impact investors who are investing because there is a market of the growth in senior housing in the United States was 14%. And in the pandemic, there's still a need, but it's for smaller places, which Care House is, right? So it's not these huge places where you put away old people. So we want to attract the interest of social impact investors. In this particular neighborhood in Baltimore, people want that kind of investment, and 1 out of every 3 buildings is abandoned. So it feels very empty. People want thriving businesses, and we want to see that too. We want to see the wealth of all the residents benefit from other businesses coming up there too. So there's a real estate component to it, and in most places. So we're mindful about the wealth of the entire neighborhood increasing, and also benefiting the people who already live there. And then it'll also be foundations as well.
So there's several ways, There's also a way of creating new financial possibilities for people within the societies. Well, that's wonderful. I think we have time for one more question. If we're lucky enough, it's going to be 2. But here's the question. So this person says that she thinks that during this pandemic and quarantine and isolation, and also taking into account the censorship, art in all of its ways sometimes becomes more political, or becomes the politic itself. So maybe that's the reason so many artistic groups or groups of people that perceive themselves as artists are in social networks, pursuing some ideas. Some of them are political. Do you agree with that? That is the situation, or it's just seems like that?
So let me just clarify the question.
Yeah.
So is the question about why is there an increase in artists working as activists, and using social networks, and what is the relationship of social networks in leveraging social change?
Exactly, yes, and the connection to any political issues and things like that.
So I think that there's times in history, and I'm most familiar with Western art history. So in Western art history, there's times when there's more of when artists are turning to using society as their canvas and engaging in society to do their artwork. today we tend to think that there's an increasing acceptance of art, the crossover between art and activism and social impact. But this is an intense moment right now in which, we're coming to terms with racial division, racism within the United States and elsewhere. We're coming to terms with history. We're coming to terms with an economic problem, the pandemic, that even happened before the pandemic, right? Because there's this hyper privatization and this erosion of the government sector, and people are starting to think about what they can do as mutual societies and mutualistic groups. At the same time, I want to point to another moment in which we see an increased activity of artists turning to society and engaging society directly. And this is 1968. So in 1968, there's revolutions taking place all over the world, and there's massive social change, right? People are going to the street. And this is the time in Western art history that still is not, we have forgotten, many of us have forgotten. But this is a time when we have groups independently grouping together and actively collaborating with scientists, with engineers, and they're going out into society. So in Los Angeles, in Palo Alto, Silicon Valley, you have Xerox PARC. It's a group of scientists and engineers who are inviting artists to work with them to help solve urgent issues or just help develop technology. We see this in MIT, the Center for Advanced Visual Studies, artists engaging society. And we also see this in London in artist placement. We see this in New York, Bell Labs, which is known as a kind of a tech innovation hub. And we also see this in London with artist placement group that placed 1,200 artists in civil society, in corporations, even like British Petroleum, like some of the largest oil companies where they're paying for an artist in residence. So there's times when we're in transition and we're looking for solutions is when artists have an important role to play and when artists are stepping up and engaging, which is where we find ourselves today.
Well, thank you very much. I think that was the clearest answer you can give to that question the person has asked. Well, Marisa, unfortunately, and I'm very sad to say that that's the time that we have with you, because the conversation with you was very interesting, the presentation and later on after that. Thank you very much for this time. Thank you very much for taking your own time in this beautiful morning to be with us and to share your story of your work with the viewers of the festival. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You have the best day. Bye-bye.
You too.
Ну что ж, дорогие друзья, это была очень интересная презентация и обсуждение работы с художницей Марисой Моран Ян. Она рассказывала о своей работе в Америке, о работе, которую она проводит, и работа, которая связана с социальными сферами, со сферами помощи людям, которые эту помощь не получают. Ну что ж, дорогие друзья, на этом заканчивается 7-й день нашего фестиваля. Он очень коротенький, но последующие 3 дня, они будут очень насыщенными, будет очень много чего интересного. Опять же, не забывайте присоединяться к нам. Давайте сейчас я вам немного вкратце расскажу о том, что будет происходить завтра. Завтра в 1:30 по времени Алматы Ольга Юркова расскажет об эволюции фейков и дезинформации. Взгляд из Украины. В 16 часов по времени Алматы у нас будет воркшоп на платформе Zoom. Джеральд Голубович расскажет о дипфейках как об оружии массовых иллюзий. Далее в 6 часов вечера Рустем Акишбеков проведет презентацию на тему «Мой путь от основателя стартапа до партнера венчурного фонда». И в 7 часов вечера у нас будет сессия под названием «9 историй». Презентация перевода сборника рассказов современных американских авторов. Участниками этой сессии будут американские писатели и лаборатория литературного перевода. Руководителем проекта являются Юрий Серебрянский и Антон Платонов. очень-очень интересный у нас будет 8-й день фестиваля. Дорогие друзья, не забывайте, что вы можете оставлять комментарии и вопросы не только для спикеров в чатах под трансляциями, но можете также и писать там и ваше мнение о сегодняшнем дне фестиваля. Также фестиваль представлен и в мессенджере Telegram, есть канал Go Viral KZ, где вы можете прочитать всю информацию о фестивале в режиме реального времени, и чат Go Viral чат, где вы можете задать вопросы организаторам обо всем, что вас интересует касательно Go Viral 2020. Как и всегда, все трансляции остаются в записи на нашем YouTube-канале, дорогие друзья. Там у вас есть возможность посмотреть трансляцию любого дня в любое удобное для вас время. Хотелось бы выразить благодарность за помощь в организации фестиваля дипломатической миссии США в Казахстане, а также акимату города Алматы, а также поблагодарить партнеров фестиваля. Это Smart Point, Eurasia Foundation, American Film Showcase, American Music Abroad, веб-сайт Drama KZ, театр Место Д, театр Ильхом и театр Артишок. Ну и, конечно же, наши замечательные, прекрасные медиа-партнеры. Это Blue Screen Казахстан, We Project Media, Окно, The Village, 18+ Idea и Бизнес и власть. Друзья, огромное всем спасибо за то, что сегодня вы были с нами. Спасибо за вашу активность. Мы завершаем 7-й день. Увидимся завтра.